Good morning, and welcome to the Path of Most Persistence. This is a place where we like to share stories and hear stories from our guests about the obstacles that they've overcome, maybe those tenacious stories that they've endured. And today, before we get started, I do want to timestamp the day. It is September 17th, 2021, and we are in the middle of celebrating the 60th anniversary of our TRIGA reactor here at Texas A&M. With me today is Dr. Sean McDevitt, who is our director at the NESC.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with me. And most importantly, we have our special guest that traveled quite a bit of distance to get here and help us celebrate. And that person is the Director General of the Nuclear Energy Agency, headquartered in Paris, France. Director General William D. Magwood IV.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here today. It is such a delight, and especially that you've dedicated a few days with us in celebrating the 60th.
It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
We appreciate it. As I mentioned in the opening, we like to share stories of persistence to our audience, and our audience is, just for a little bit of background, it's wide-ranging. Those might be students that are in K-12 education, their parents, educators themselves, and also hopefully some of our colleagues, not only here throughout the university, but throughout the state, and now that we have you, hopefully globally as well. So with that being said, and that being the topic, do you want to start off just telling us a little bit about yourself and maybe some of the things that have made you who you are today?
Oh my. How much time do we have again? Well, first, it's a real pleasure to be here and to visit Texas A&M again. I've been here probably more times than I can count. It seems like I get down here quite often because there's so much to see at Texas A&M, and it's a real pleasure to participate in the 60th anniversary celebration. So thank you. Well, let's see. Where would one begin? Well, obviously, I think the first and most important thing to note is that I grew up in Pittsburgh. Go Steelers! Kill the Raiders this weekend.
Oh no!
And growing up in a city that had such a strong nuclear background, nuclear was always kind of out there. I worked. My first experience with industry was when I was a ninth grader, and I was invited to participate in something called the Westinghouse Science Honors Institute, which is a program for seniors. So I was a little bit ahead of my time on that.
Nice.
And so I got to go every Saturday morning, no matter how much snow there was on the ground. I would go to listen to lectures from Westinghouse scientists on things like fusion energy and nuclear fission and superconductivity. So that's kind of where my first experience with the industry came, and I kind of made up my mind at that point I wanted to work at Westinghouse. And when I got to college, I started working at Westinghouse's Research and Development Center every summer. So for 4 straight summers, I worked at the Westinghouse Research Center, and I realized something in the course of that that was probably one of the most important realizations of my life, which was I was never going to be a good lab rat. It just wasn't my thing. I didn't enjoy it. I burned myself with liquid nitrogen once. It took like a month for it to heal. It just wasn't my thing. Some people enjoy it. I just didn't. And something happened that also was a pretty big revelation for me. Our project, which at the time was funded by the Electric Power Research Institute, on superconductivity, we were developing a superconducting stator for a generator. Our project got canceled. And all these really incredible scientists and engineers were working on the project. They were all kind of devastated and moaning and groaning. And I realized at that moment that no matter how smart these guys were, no matter how experienced they were and all the great things they could do, they weren't in control of anything. They were at the mercy of some guys in suits in an office somewhere. And I remember thinking to myself, I'd rather be one of those guys making the decisions as opposed to the guy in the lab. And that really kind of changed my perspective. So I did eventually start working at Westinghouse and found that it wasn't something that I was really enjoying very much. It was fine It was nice to be working, and then I was working in waste technology, and I learned a lot, dimensioning analysis, but it just wasn't quite clicking with me. And so I was sort of moaning about working on RFPs all the time instead of doing something really interesting. And my supervisor passed me in the hallway once, and he said, "Hi, Bill, how's it going?" And he sort of caught me at a bad time because I told him. So I just kind of like groused at him for a solid 5 minutes about how unhappy I was. It wasn't what I wanted to do. This is not really interesting. And he listened sympathetic. I gave him a lot of credit for that because he didn't have to do that. And then he said, well, he said, at the end of the day, if you're really not happy, you can always just leave. And I looked at him. I said, you're right. So I did. And that led to another interesting development. And this is something when I talk to people I mentor, I talk about this a lot. And even recently, when I was talking to someone, I told this story because I decided that I wanted to get away from nuclear at that point. That was during the 80s, and the future for nuclear wasn't particularly clear at that point. And I thought maybe I should just do something different. So I did what the senior engineer said was decontaminating my resume. Tried to get all the nuclear stuff out of it, and because I like doing computer analysis. And so I started applying to different organizations where I could do computer stuff. And one company, I won't name the company, was interested. So I went out and I interviewed with them. And they loved me. They thought I was perfect for what they wanted. And I was going to be able to build these really complex models, and it was just going to be a lot of fun. And so I met with the personnel lady at the end of the day, and she said, everybody loves you. You're just perfect for what we have in mind here. And so I went home feeling really good, saying I'm going to get out of Westinghouse. I'm going to start this whole different path. This will be great. She calls me the next morning, and I could tell from the sound of her voice that things hadn't gone according to plan.
Oh, no.
And what she said was that, we really, really like you, and I really feel horrible about this, but we have a higher internal first policy. And one of our engineers found out about this position and said he wanted it. And our policy is we had to take him. So we're really sorry. So I was really kind of devastated. This is something I thought I had in my hands. So I said, okay, so much for decontaminating the resume. Go back to nuclear, put your resume out, and see what happens. And I got a call from the Edison Electric Institute in Washington, and they hired me. And the first good thing was to double my salary in one fell swoop, which was cool.
That's sweet.
So I moved to Washington and worked at the Edison Electric Institute and discovered that this was kind of what I wanted to do. I was able to develop ideas, talk to people in Congress and develop thoughts about what to do, work with the utility experts and put plans and reports together. I really enjoyed that for a long time. And eventually an opportunity came up, and I was asked to come to the Department of Energy as a political appointee in the Clinton administration, which was funny for me because I was never very political, but they needed someone that could spell neutron, so I went. And so I went to work at the Department of Energy, and in 1994, so that dates me, of course. Everybody knows I'm old. And
you're amongst friends here.
Yeah, so don't tell anybody.
No.
And that really, I think, was when I really started to see, okay, I used to tell people often about first best destinies, and I realized I kind of found my first best destiny, and it was the ability to harness lots of different factors, resources, people, institutions, to solve problems, to fix things, to make the world a better place. And I was in a position where I could now do that. And after a few years, I became the head of the Office of Nuclear Energy. And that came on at an auspicious time because our budget got zeroed. Congress didn't believe in our program. They didn't think we knew what we were doing. And, so there's a zero budget, and they say, hey, Bill, you want to take over the office? Sure, why not? And so I got to build the program from scratch, and that was a unique opportunity that to this day I'm really quite proud of because we had lost the whole program. So we started off by developing an advisory committee for nuclear energy, which still exists. It's called NEAC today. I've actually been asked to serve on that now, as a matter of fact, so things come around to bite you.
It's your fault.
Yeah, it is. We developed the Generation 4 program, so the Generation 4 International Forum. We did Nuclear Power 2010, which led to the AP 1000 projects. And most importantly, perhaps, we made a determined effort to rescue nuclear engineering education in the U.S., which had taken really significant body blows. And I was telling a group of students yesterday that in the entire country, in 1998, when I took over, there were less than 500 undergraduates in all nuclear engineering programs across the United States. And it seemed like a death spiral.
Yes.
And so one of the things we were focused on was rebuilding that infrastructure. So we got money from Congress. There's some really incredible congressmen. Congressman Nolenberg from Michigan was one that really stood up and said, we got to fix this problem. And he gave us money. And so we started to do research grants and scholarships and infrastructure development. And we did some really creative things, like building the partnership program between big universities like Texas A&M and HBCUs like Prairie View.
Yes.
We did that across the country. And in one case, it led to one HBCU, South Carolina State, establishing its own independent, fully accredited nuclear engineering program. It's still the only one in the HBCU in the country. And we did that. So we were really proud of that and proud of a lot of things we accomplished. So when I look back at that experience when I didn't get that software job.
Yes.
And how horrible it felt to lose that opportunity, but to then find my first best destiny, which I would not have found if I gotten that job. I might be sitting in suburban Pittsburgh right now playing with computer programs instead of having done the things I've done with my career. And so you're always going to have these disappointments, but they aren't necessary. Even though they're not what you wanted, they don't necessarily mean that your life is over, your career is over, or that you've fallen off the scope. They might really open up opportunities for things you didn't even know about.
Absolutely.
And this happens quite frequently. And I look back at my career, I find lots of areas where the unexpected happened and led to something I didn't see coming.
Yes.
Sort of flash forward, after 11 years at the Department of Energy, and this is a little known secret, but I am apparently, from what people have told me, the longest serving political appointee contiguously in DOE history. 11 years as a political appointee across 2 administrations. No one will ever do that again because it was idiotic to stay that long. But after that, a few years later, I was doing some independent work and just kind of doing consulting with government agencies overseas, mostly doing some advisory work. And American Physical Society, I was doing something with them, just different things to keep myself entertained. And one thing that came to me was a group of people, and I had this philosophy that I didn't really want to work for anybody. But if you wanted to talk to me, I'd give you free advice. All you got to do is buy me lunch.
Yes.
So this group bought me lunch. And it was a group that was working on a book that was going to be called Messages to the New President. And so we were right at the cusp of the Obama administration coming in. And these guys were putting books of policy recommendations together to go to the White House. It was covering health care and all sorts of things. And for some reason, they decided that they wanted to talk about nuclear waste and how to solve nuclear waste. And someone told them that they could talk to me to get some advice. So I had lunch with them. And I pontificated at them for over an hour, and they were writing those furiously. And they were really happy with everything, the whole mind up. And I said, great, it was a nice lunch, see ya, So a couple weeks later, they called me, and they said, we learned so much from you. We don't think we can replicate what you were telling us. Would you like to write this chapter of the book?
Oh, my goodness.
And I thought, all right. So I did that. And the book came out. And apparently people read it because people in the administration were looking for some help. And they called me. They said, well, he saw this book, and you like your recommendations. And eventually they said, would you like to be on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? And this was the furthest thing from my mind. I had no intention of coming back into government. I had just escaped from 11 years of it. But it just struck me as well, that could be really interesting. That's an aspect of nuclear I never really thought about. And, I knew we were on the cusp of new plants being built in the U.S., so I thought, why not? Let's try that. And one funny story. So I got nominated, confirmed, sworn in as the commissioner, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And unlike some of my commission colleagues, I decided that I wouldn't try to find my staff until after I got there. So the first challenge was when I got to my office that first Monday morning was I didn't know where the light switch was. So I opened the door and I was like groping around for the light switch and finally found it and went into my office for the first time and saw that there was a PC on my desk. So the first thing I have always done in my entire career when I walk into an office the first time is I was sitting there setting up the PC. Obviously, that's what the commissioner's going to do, right? Optimize a PC.
You go back to your first love, that technology.
Yeah. So I'm fixing the PC up, and I'm sitting there typing away and organizing the PC. This young lady comes in out of nowhere, and she starts fiddling with the doorknob. And she kind of looks at me, and she says, "Hi, is it okay if I come in?" And I said, "Sure." So she comes in, and she is looking at the doorknobs, and I'm like, wonder what this is about. And she goes into, this is a secret some people don't know, but commissioners have their own restroom inside their offices. So she goes into the commissioner's restroom, and she's checking things in there. And she says, I just came in to make sure everything was all together. She looked at me, she said, there's a new commissioner coming in today. And I said, yeah, I heard that. Yeah, later she told me that wasn't fair. I should have told her it wasn't.
You didn't catch her off guard and say, "Oh, what have you heard about him? What can you tell me about?"
No, I should have done that. And so then I spent 4 years there, and like I said, I really thought I was there, to sort of advance the technology, and we were excited about, the nuclear renaissance, new plants being built. And now I was going to have this safety perspective to take to it, which I was pretty excited to learn about. And I learned so much during my time there. And of course, about a year after I became a commissioner, I woke up one morning to the news of the tsunami in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, that obviously was a game changer in many ways. And that day was just a horrible day, of course, because we went to work that morning. Hearing about what happened in Japan, and we had TV, so we were watching the tsunami, just incredible pictures of devastation. It's just a tragic morning, and we were focused on that. And I was trying to call friends in Japan to see if they were okay, and you couldn't get through to anybody, so I was worried about them. And it's late in the morning, we started hearing about Fukushima Daiichi, and said, well, where's that? What's happening? And we were told, don't worry, it's all okay. It's under control. And over the course of that morning and afternoon, we started to hear a little bit more and a little bit more, and it became increasingly clear that things weren't okay. And so it was probably, and I know we had people in our emergency operations center, so I knew they knew before I knew, but I remember seeing on TV the hydrogen explosions. And my brother called me and said, David, I see this. I said, what is it? He said, this isn't good, is it? I said, this is definitely not good, Right. And, so we had that week after the accident. And that was a week I'll never forget because we didn't have a lot of information. We didn't know how to handle it in some ways because, this wasn't our accident. We kept reminding the staff. I said, we have to keep in mind this is another country's accident. Yes. We can help, we can offer support, but we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to make guesses about what's happening. Yes. We want to stay, and so it was a real tension between the fact we wanted to help so much and try to solve the problem, and the fact that it wasn't our accident. And some unfortunate things happened during that period. One thing is that we decided to stay silent. which I think was a mistake. In the vacuum of our silence, other people were saying things that were not smart.
Mm-hmm.
And there were people who said some really good things. Some of the NGO groups, Physicians for Social Responsibility, said things and put things on a website which were spot on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so grateful because no one else was saying the right things.
Yes.
And they were putting factual information out. So I always appreciate that they really stood up and didn't, could have tried to make it, inflate the story, but they were very factual, very straight, and I think they did a great job. But we watched this very closely, and we were, just laser focused on it the whole week. And there were days where we were getting very, very concerned about how this might go. There's there were stories leaking out about maybe there was a problem with spent fuel pools. I think, some of the things that got said about that were just flat wrong, and people just shouldn't have been saying it because there wasn't enough information. And the Japanese were telling us that there wasn't a problem. So I don't know why that happened, but it's unfortunate. But we got through it. And it's one of the most proudest things about it was as soon as the accident happened, NRC staff started volunteering to go to Japan. And there were other countries that were pulling people out of their embassies and sending getting people out of Japan. We were going to Japan. The U.S. Embassy, over doubled its size over the course of a couple of weeks. So it's just,
incredible.
I think the Japanese were surprised to some degree how much we've responded. So that was an event that really has just shaped everything that's come afterwards, and for better and for worse. I mean, I became much closer to people in Japan. I went to Japan on average about 4 times a year since the accident, up until the plague. And got to know people very well, got to understand things in Japan much better, and to this day we're still supporting them now at the NEA to recover. In fact, we just issued our 10-year report not long ago on the Fukushima Daiichi accident. So with now it's been 10 years since the accident, and sometimes it doesn't feel like 10 years. But we see that things have kind of evolved past that, and what I see happening now are the countries are now kind of coming back to the nuclear conversation. It's not happening in a flood. It's a trickle.
Right.
A country here, a country there. Statements by ministers in various places where you see that the conversation is starting to shift away from the fear created by Fukushima Daiichi and more towards the need to use nuclear technology to solve environmental and energy security issues around the world. And so I'm very encouraged that there's all these new innovative technologies being developed all over the world. Many in the United States, technologies using Gen 4 technologies as well as light water reactor-based technologies. And some of them, I think, can be game changers. And I'm very excited by technologies, for example, that don't require offsite emergency preparedness. I think that's a binary issue for me, because if you can tell populations, tell countries that you can have this nuclear power plant and there's no scenario where you have to evacuate people, that changes the conversation. And so that's what we're waiting to see, if the regulators can come to grips with that. There are challenges ahead. The technologies have to be proven, the products have to be there. Regulators have to respond to these new innovations. We have to find a way to create global markets instead of national markets, because if we're going to be successful in deploying these technologies, we have to be able to do it across the world. So these are all big challenges, but I feel optimistic about where we are today. And I really wouldn't want to be anywhere else right now than where I am at the Nuclear Energy Agency, helping countries solve these problems.
What?
I was going to ask, as you think of the audience we have, there's at least a portion of them that either were so young that they don't remember Fukushima, or it's been 10 years. Some of them maybe weren't even alive then, and if it happened before you were born, it was a really long time ago.
Yeah.
And so now, as we're in this period of recovery, it's more getting to know you to them, I'm thinking about, you've had multiple high-profile positions from the Department of Energy to the NRC and now to the NEA. And as you are in these positions, whether you feel it or not, you have a certain celebrity in the nuclear community.
Oh my!
And in Hollywood they have that game 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. So there's a certain 7 degrees of Bill Magwood that exists. That you could say, I know this person that knows this person that knows Bill. And from your perspective, sitting in that bubble, whether you know it or not or feel it or not, there's a certain amount of, perseverance, to get back to our topic of the day. That does that impact you? How do you deal with it? And also talking to young people from where you were back in Pittsburgh. I'm a Steelers fan too, but back in Pittsburgh, you weren't envisioning any of this in your life, and it was these various decisions, some of them forced upon you, that got you there. So now you have this position that you have, I think the right word is you've evolved and grown into it. What would you say to somebody who's somewhere between 10 and 20 years old who might be in your chair 20, 30, 40 years from now?
I think there's basically 3 things that I think I would say. One thing is, and this is something I say to students, and I know it makes professors and parents cringe when I say it, but really, I think that the most important thing I've learned is to not to listen to what people say. Well, that's not fair. You listen to what people say, but you have to make up your own mind. You have to. You can't go against your own instincts, and it never really goes well. Even people you respect, if they tell you, well, no, you shouldn't do that. You should do this because this is plastic, right? Plastics. And that's an old one.
Yeah, it's an old movie too, so I got it.
And for you young people, just look it up. And I think that if you listen to what people tell you from their perspective, you're making a mistake because you're unique. Your background is unique. Your experience is unique. Your purpose in life is unique. And so ultimately, you listen to what people say, but you make up your own mind, and you don't let yourself be influenced by people unduly. So I'm really bad at. I was always a horrible employee. That's why I've always been leader, because I couldn't work for anybody.
Yes, I understand.
And my parents can tell you, I just never. I'm just not the kind of person that takes instruction very well. I expect people to listen to my instructions, but I don't do it well. I think being that way is important, because you take responsibility for your mistakes and you learn from them. And so that's one important thing. The second thing I would say is, and this is also something that goes counter to a lot of advice, I think life is tactical. It's not strategic. Yeah. You don't know what's going to happen next week. And, I remember I used to work for a guy at Westinghouse that had this plan. He said, in 5 years, I'm going to be a manager. In 10 years, I'm going to be a director. In 15 years, I'm going to be a vice president. He had this sort of life laid out. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, I look at that and think that's nuts. You don't know what you're going to be doing 10 years from now. You don't know what you're going to be doing a year from now. Did you know the pandemic was going to come up? Yeah. Did you know the Fukushima Daiichi was going to happen? Yeah. Did you know about the fracking revolution? No, you didn't know any of that. So you don't know. So you have to make good decisions on an ongoing basis. Absolutely. And you do the best you can. Hopefully you get it right more than you get it wrong. But the idea that you can plan your life out long term, life just isn't like that.
That is so important for our young people. Well, not just our young people, for all of our audience to hear. I think we talk a lot about in our programming and with our young people for sure that to persist, to overcome, it takes a lot of nimbleness. You must be nimble to endure because of those obstacles, those tactical aspects of things. But some of the things that I want to pull out of important message is I find it fascinating that when you were such a young person, you quickly, with Westinghouse, how you identified, you went to their lectures, those opportunities that they provided at such a young age, and you determined so young that you wanted to be part of that. And because we do so much with outreach and developing programs and opportunities for young people, I'm wondering not only what you can share, what they did that helped you find a place within them, but also I know that you spend so much of your time and your effort reaching out, giving back to young people, not only in mentoring directly, but also indirectly in your efforts. So for not only us, for Dr. McDevitt and myself, what are some things that you can share with us to help us maybe better improve our intention of how we develop and move forward? And also for our young people that are listening, what can you provide them as far as that openness to take on things that are new, maybe things that they had never envisioned for themselves?
Well, one thing, and I guess is part of it's cultural. And when I was growing up, when I was very young, we had, men landing on the moon, and technology, the future, it was coming, it was exciting. It's a place you wanted to be. And I grew up with that. That was a big part of, my thought process. The future's an exciting place. And let's get there as fast as we can, and let's have, let's go to Mars, and I feel sometimes that the generation that's coming up now, I don't know that they have that. I don't feel like we have that that feeling of excitement about the future, and so what I try to do, I have always had this, I always will have it. I have an excitement for the future. I think the future is going to be a great place. I think humanity, the sort of quote Star Trek, the human adventure is just beginning,
Nice.
And I feel sometimes that our society today is so inwardly focused, so focused on today's issues and problems, that we don't really look over the horizon. Mm-hmm. And so I think the most important thing is to get young people to think about what's over the horizon. Yes. It's not about next year. It's not about 10 years from now. It's about 50 years from now. And I often, when I give presentations to students, I show this picture of, it was taken in 1961, actually the month I was born. Well, that reveals it all, doesn't it? And it was a picture of Glenn Seaborg, who was then chair of the Atomic Energy Commission. And he was with Jim Webb, who was the head of NASA, and they were signing this agreement for their two agencies to work on space nuclear. And there was this picture, this futuristic picture of some spacecraft zooming off into the solar system. And I always look at this picture with a lot of reverence because, these two guys had to know they would never see those technologies, come to fruition. This is a long-term initiative they were undertaking. But yet they were going to devote resources, prestige, to set us off in that path. We don't do enough of that. We need to do that. And those of us musicians like I have to project that for the future. That's where the excitement comes in, and that's how you galvanize young people about particularly the engineering and science areas, and to show them that it isn't just solving today's problems, it's making the world a better place in the longer term, and that's where the excitement really is.
That is perfect, and I like the fact you haven't really articulated it directly, but the fact that it seems every time that there's been an obstacle or an issue or something in front of you, where some people may approach it with fear, you seem to be very intentional about looking at it with excitement, with an opportunity to do something new or exciting or some way to grow. And I think that for some people that comes about naturally. Mm-hmm. Some people have to force that upon themselves to choose that way. But it seems as though that might be a little bit of both for you. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
The way I look at it is this. There's always plan B and plan C and plan D. I get frustrated sometimes when I see people say, well, this didn't work and this is all over and I don't know what I'm going to do. So, well, what's plan B?
Yes.
You can't, because you can't fix what went wrong. You can't fix what happened last year. All you can fix is what you do next.
That's perfect.
I even every day when I'm with my staff and not everything works the first time.
That's right.
And sometimes you just don't get it to work at all. But my philosophy has always been that when I'm doing something, I usually have about 4 different things going.
Yes.
And if 3 of them work, that's cool.
Right.
Yeah, you don't get them all. We had big disappointments when I was at DOE. We lost the high flux beam reactor. I was talking with someone on another podcast about that. We lost the FFTF. We lost EBR2 got shut down. These were huge setbacks. And we had to recover from that. And we still haven't fully recovered from all of it. But, these were disappointments. But we went to the next step and we did other things. And we got Generation 4. We signed agreements with other countries around the world. We did things that made a difference. And that's all you can do. You can't moan about the things that don't work out. You take the next step and you find out, okay, that path didn't work. Was it Bruce Lee that said, be water?
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Be water.
Yes.
And I think that's really what, in my view, not just your professional life, but your whole life. You don't just beat your head against the obstacle. You go around the obstacle.
Yes.
You take another path, and that's what I've always tried to do. So I think at the end of the day, I'm happy with where I ended up, even though it wasn't particularly planned.
Yes.
And I think that if you try to take a rigid plan, you do run into a wall.
Yes.
But if you're flexible, you're adaptable. You learn a lot of different things. You know as much as you can. You're able to adjust and to adapt to what circumstances arise, and I think that's really the most important thing.
I think that's powerfully put. And I think, again, going back to our young people that we work with, sometimes just because of maturity or a circumstance, sometimes they've made a mistake or a poor decision in their current life or maybe in their recent history. And sometimes they really beat themselves up. Sometimes other people add to that. But sometimes they feel as though they've made a mistake that will prevent them for the rest of their future. So when you say those things, I think that's very impactful for them to hear, because we try to remind them that your mistakes do not define you. Every day is a new opportunity. So you phrasing it in those ways to be water, I think that's lovely and perfect. But I want to stretch out just a little bit more because of all the positions that you've had, and especially in the last decade or so. You've gone through, or you've been in position through many changes within administration, and of course, political circumstances and environments. And I think what our young people need to hear as well is that sometimes, again, they may be young, but they are exposed to those types of things, those conversations and circumstances of feeling that they have to choose a side. And I would like to hear from you how it is you've been able to navigate and to sustain your positions and your relationships in environments that cannot always be very hospitable or friendly. So that is something that obviously you've been able to endure. So can you share with our audience, and especially our young people, the importance of maintaining diplomacy, perhaps? How do you do that?
Well, there's an interesting question. How did I do that? Well, I mean, one thing is that you can be a scientist or an engineer in situations and not have to choose a side. You can play it straight down the middle, and to some degree, people will respect that. I mean, there's always some politics involved in things. But when I was in the Clinton administration, this was not an administration that was really particularly excited about nuclear through most of the time I was there. They kind of tolerated me. Fortunately, I have to say, the last secretary during the Clinton administration was Bill Richardson, and Bill Richardson, he really kind of provided an environment for me to do what I wanted to do. I think he trusted me to go do what I was doing. He didn't always agree with what I was, I didn't get everything I wanted out of him, but he made it possible for me to kind of just do my thing, and so the environment was right, so that even if we didn't have the resources to do everything we wanted to do, we could plan it out. And so we spent the last couple of years of the Clinton administration planning a lot of things, writing plans, working with advisory committees. One funny story, I'll share this story because it's a good symbol of how things kind of happen. I was just sitting in my office, and it was getting late, and it was probably the last couple of weeks, even later, of the Clinton administration. I had already been asked to stay by President Bush to stay in position, and I remember I got this phone call, and there was a Japanese minister that was visiting the DOE, and apparently he wanted to talk about nuclear. So the undersecretaries was going to meet with him, and they said, hey, why don't you go up and be with the undersecretary in case something relevant comes up in nuclear. I said, okay. So I go up, and I'm sitting there, and this minister, I didn't know this minister. I never met him. And he starts waxing on about, with this Generation 4 initiative that you started is just fantastic, and we are looking forward to signing the treaty, and he started going on. And the truth is, I never really told anybody at DOE that we were doing exactly what we were doing, and that there was a treaty being, I didn't tell them about the treaty. And the undersecretaries look at me like you can see the crowd, oh, jeez, And I remember, so after the meeting, he pulled me aside, and he said, I don't know what's going on here, but there's not going to be any treaty, right? And I remember thinking, you're here like 2 weeks. And a few weeks later, Secretary Abraham came in, and I briefed him. And I remember his first reaction, he said, this is really cool. Can I go to the meetings with you on this? When can we do this? So it was kind of like we were rewarded for all the times that we spent, where we just couldn't get resources. And we now had an administration that was willing to give us resources. So and so we were able to actually progress it, but that wasn't partisan. It was never partisan. It was always, we had a clear technical agenda. We made it very clear about what we wanted to accomplish and why we wanted to accomplish, and it just, we were able to plan it, but then we were able to start implementing it, and we got, things like Generation 4 treaty signed. We got Nuclear Power 2010 off the ground and other things, and so it was really just. It just worked out. I guess my view is that as long as you're being straight, you stick to the facts. You don't have to be political about it, and I've never been particularly political about it. But I will say that sometimes you do have to choose sides. I'm not going to go into any of that, but sometimes you have to take a stand. And nothing is more important to me than your own principles. If you see something that's wrong, if you think that something should be stopped, you have an obligation. And particularly people in the nuclear sector, I mean, I used to preach this a lot when I was at the NRC, but we all have this obligation in the nuclear sector to stand up and speak out if you see something that's not safe or not the right way to do business. It's more important in nuclear perhaps than any other discipline, because if you take a blind eye to the things that aren't being done the correct way, you could be jeopardizing nuclear safety. You could be jeopardizing lives, and so everyone has this responsibility, and I take this very personally. And I'm just one of those people. I am willing to grab the flag and run into the battle for the right cause, and I'm big on that sort of thing. And so I think that you do sometimes have to take a stand, and just recognize sometimes there's consequences, but feel good about it. I've taken stands where I've had to, have some arrows swing me. I'm cool with it because, I know I did the right thing for the right reasons, and so I'm very, very comfortable with that.
I think that's wonderful for our young people to hear, well, all of us, of course, but specifically our young people, that they should have certain standards and stand by them, and especially coming from someone from at your stature, with your stature, your positions, your experience. I think that's a wonderful thing, because not only are you saying it, but it's obvious that you live it.
Yeah, it was good for me to hear. so it just is very much the right message to end this time with, other than just thank you for your perspective.
No,
and all of this.
It's very much my pleasure. And again, congratulations on the 60th anniversary of the TRIGA. It's pretty exciting. I'm going to go see the TRIGA in just a few minutes. We're going to go see that. But let me just sort of conclude, and just by noting that, as I said, the future is an exciting place, and for nuclear students in particular, I envy you. I envy your students, because when I was first starting off in the industry, when I was at DOE, the time wasn't quite there. I think the time is there now. I think you are in the right place at the right time, and in the next decade, even less, maybe the next 5 years, we're going to see things happening in the nuclear sector, the likes of which perhaps we've not seen since the 1950s. So this generation is going to be the generation that really kind of, I think, has the chance to fulfill the original promise of nuclear energy and nuclear technology. And so for us old people who are close to the end of our careers, the beginning, we envy you, we hate you. So the only thing I can say to you is, for you students, is take the ball and run with it, and don't look back, and don't screw it up.
Well, that is perfection, and especially you out there, you young people out there, you heard it. You heard it directly from DG Magwood, that he's excited for you, he's envious of you. Take that ball and run, and we couldn't leave on a much more positive note. So thank you for that. And I want to say to Dr. McDevitt, thank you for being with us today. But most definitely, again, DG Magwood, thank you so much for being with us, for traveling all this way to be with us. And to you, our audience, thank you for being here with the Path of Most Persistence. I hope you not only listen to this entire message, this chat, but you listen to all our other chats with all of our other tenacious guests. And let's all be like water. Have a great day.